Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you'd like to find out more about Office Hours and what we do, go to officehours.global. If there's also a schedule there for the whole week. The first hour is generally some things that we think we have questions about media, virtual production. That's the first hour. Second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. Today, Monday, we're going to spend a little more time on more questions. so we're going to have extended. We've got a lot of questions stacked up. So we'll get moving. Bill, what questions do we have?
Our first one comes from Ashudev in New York City. He says, love the experimentation of the Mobley and Belfast methods. They're getting complex for those not in the biz as we do more. Can we have a minimalist version of these for office hours who are not in the biz and want to experiment in their home labs?
Go ahead, Leo.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the way that with anything, with these things, they're going to go, everybody wants to make one event better and better and better. But I have my own shows, and when I start my own shows in the next round, I'm going to actually offer the opportunity to bring them into that environment, and hopefully that will enable others to do the same, you know, and expand. I think Ash is right that everybody wants to keep it, you know, all of a sudden we go from here to running at 100 miles an hour, and sometimes it's a bit too fast for everybody to follow.
Go ahead, David.
I think this is a really interesting question because I deal primarily with people who are not in the biz. And a lot of the talk here is above my head and a lot of people's heads. And so what is the direction of, are we geared toward professionals in the business, or are we geared toward lay people, or are we trying to be both? I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's a wonderful question.
All right, go ahead, Jonas.
One of the things that we are trying to do is figure out how it works in the grand scale. And then what you also will see, me trying some stuff with a Raspberry Pi, Jim trying stuff with Ubiquiti stuff or the C3s. We are trying to make it more accessible and affordable. But for that, we first need to figure out how to do it at all. And I'm sure we'll have some labs where we'll, I don't know, take your Raspberry Pi and let someone else control your ATEM. I'm sure we'll get there pretty soon, but at the moment we're still running away to figure out what is even possible, and then we'll bring it down to smaller scales, to more a budget scale.
Yeah, I think a lot of this is just that we are in this mode of growth where we're just trying to figure out which way is up. I think that the mixture is, what we don't want to do is dumb it down to a point where professionals aren't interested. You know, like this is not where we're trying to go. We want them to be there. The heterogeneous mix of new people who are interested in doing this and professionals who keep on stretching that outer boundary is part of what makes it interesting. The energy from the new members is, keeps, they're not jaded yet. They're not frustrated. They don't have a long list of complaints yet. And that injects some interest and some vibe, some verve into the system. Whereas the folks who have done it a lot can bring a lot of experience and kind of show where this could end up. One of the things that we do a lot here is that any question is open during office hours, and then for 21 hours, we're all sitting around hanging out. And so if you see, I don't know if he came the other day or yesterday, but I was talking to someone who was trying to figure something out in the cloud. And I said, Jonas is up there right now. You can probably just go up there and ask him, and he'll just answer your questions. And so what you want is that there's a handful of us that just keep stretching that outer boundary. As long as those that are stretching that outer boundary are willing to come back and answer questions about how it's getting done, I think that we're in good stead. If they stop answering questions or start just going off on their own, then, and the real benefit for them, for those that are pushing that outer edge, is when people need help, they know where to go to find it, to hire people or to work on projects and so on and so forth. And so there's an opportunity for the more advanced members to, show what they know, but in a way that is including the rest of the audience, or the rest of the members. And so there's this kind of symbiotic relationship that goes on between the two that I think is really valuable. But I think that we always want to make sure that we are answering those questions during after hours, and we are answering them here. Next question.
Comes from Rupert.
Oh, sorry, Chris. Go ahead, Chris. Okay. I missed the late hand.
It was absolutely a late hand, but I was triggering off of something you just said.
Yep.
I think it's also really important for those that are pushing the boundaries and learning new things. Most people, myself included for sure, we retain better when we teach. John would probably agree with this. So coming back to the community and say, okay, I figured something out. It was difficult. Let me explain it to you. It's actually a benefit for you as well.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jonas.
And one of the things that we're working on as the team that is producing all of those events right now is letting people shadow. When I build infrastructure that is not a critical or I can show, I'll always do it in after hours so people can just see and ask questions. And that's one of the great things with those open productions like the Tony or the Belfast, that we can just go into after hours and show our screens because it's nothing confidential.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll get, and hopefully some people who want to do something more simple can also ask for advice and just try to go ahead and do it in after hours, asking questions about why doesn't this work and why can't I do this? And there's definitely plenty of people that are up there, answering those questions. In a lot of ways, we were talking about this in the education hour over the weekend. We were talking about where we store information or when we study. And one thing that I was talking about was the fact that I store information in people, like I store it in all of you. So when you store it in notes, or you store it in Evernote or anything else, it's the same as it was when you left it. When you store it in people, it's better when you come back. You store information in other people, and then what happens is you come back and it's like a whole bunch of more information. So a whole bunch of things that they figured out with what you had, and then you can come back and ask them those questions, and they know it more than you do. And that is it's a pretty valuable. Like we want to understand how valuable that process is, because it's not something a lot of us have access to. Anyway, next question.
Moving on to Rupert McCrae in Dallas, Texas, here on the panel. And Rupert asks, does joining a licensed Zoom room or a Zoom collaboration device to an otherwise free Zoom meeting still bump the meeting beyond the free 40-minute time limit, as well as bumping it to HD?
Jonas?
Yes, I just tested it, but it doesn't work with the collaboration devices because they get a special account. If you look in the backend or under users, you'll actually find the account for the collaboration device, and it's a basic one and unlicensed. The unlicensed one don't give you the 40 minutes, but they should still give you the 720p bump.
Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, I was going to say that I wouldn't have thought that the 40-minute did change because it doesn't assume the host, and I've had that problem before with meetings not changing, but it would do the 720p. That's a different thing. So anyway, I haven't actually tested because I've had a license account for a long time.
There's a weird bug with the 40-minute thing that only starts at the third person. So if you have one person opening the meeting and then join with the Zoom room, because the 40 minutes might not have been triggered yet, the Zoom room can't upgrade it sometimes. So there's this weird place where you have to wait till two people are in. So the Zoom room bumps it over to the 40 and then removes it.
Rupert?
Yeah, that was kind of my question. I think there's some subtlety of when this works and when it doesn't work, and whether you're using a device to join somebody else's free meeting or whether you're assuming it'll create the free meeting for itself. I'm just trying to work out that behavior.
Next question.
Mike Emmett in Melbourne, Australia is up next. If you're planning a new show, what factors would you consider in deciding between a hardware versus a software workflow for your show production?
Go ahead, Chris.
Before I even go there, one thing I would advise everybody is when you're planning a new show, shows do best when they're regular. Shows do best when your audience can count on them being there. As media professionals, it's very easy for us to design something that's really elaborate, but it's not repeatable on a weekly or a monthly basis, however we want to do our show. So make sure whatever you design, you can actually do it every week. And if it involves too many people or too many resources that are too expensive, you might want to scale back just so that you can deliver a show to your audience regularly.
Good, Courtney.
Yeah, I'd say determine whether or not the show's going to expand. If you're going to suddenly find yourself needing more inputs, software can bog down and hang if you overtax your machine. So I would vote hardware as your base and have enough hardware to cover the maximum number of inputs you're going to do. And then if you want to augment that for production with John Barker's software or many of the control softwares that are out there to control things like the ATEM Mini Extremes, you can create a really good looking show with lots, controllable lower thirds and everything else. The hardware takes the brunt of the control of the show. And that way, if your software crashes, you can still go back to pushing the buttons and finish the show without any fear of it going off the air, going south, or having to reboot.
Good, Leo.
So the big thing I always look at is the two things that Chris already mentioned, which is the talent, or not the talent, but the people who are running the show, and if you've got the resources to do it. So either way that you look at it, hardware or software, different people have different skill sets. So you've got to make sure that the product, how you're going to deliver it, you can actually maintain it. The other thing I would say about the expandability is whether the show's ever going to go on the road or go into different locations. Sometimes it will be easier to move certain elements into the cloud. That you know that you can actually move around, because the setup and de-rigging of if it's in different locations could be hugely cost effective to move things into the cloud.
Go ahead, Jonas.
I would say it depends on multiple factors. If you, for example, have a fully virtual workflow, folding everything into hardware and then folding it back into whatever software you need to play it out, like Zoom, it might make more sense to use software in that way. If you have cameras and, for example, an iMac screen, then you definitely need hardware. And one of the things to always keep in mind, I found people use software on the edge. It's like, okay, we'll start with the software. It's great. But we reach the capabilities. And every time you design a system for a show, you want to run it at 40% only, because there will be a lot of ads all the time as soon as you run it. And I found people with software often don't figure them in. And on hardware, it's easier to expand because you don't have to think about all your CPU limits and all that. So if you use software, factor that in, only run at 30% capacity versus 70 or something for the expandability.
Yeah, and I think that the thing is that it looks like what kind of show. So if you ask another question of like, I'm going to have this kind of show, well, then we might have a different set of answers. As far as software on-prem, because this is kind of software, we don't know whether this is for where it's going to. I definitely, for smaller events, have used mimoLive because it's just easy for me to just throw it, just turn it onto an iMac and post stuff into a system. But if I was going to recommend something, I actually would probably recommend an ATEM to start with, just because you can plug a couple things in, you push the big buttons and they work, and it doesn't overtax the system. So it just depends on the kind of show that you're doing. I will say that because part of my leaning towards hardware is because I like graphics to look nice and clean. I don't need them to look complicated, and so there's a lot of things you can do in software that people really like that I don't think I need. So I think that's part of the issue. Next question.
Jasmine Lee in Singapore is up next. And Jasmine says, what would be the most compelling feature that the new iPhone could have that would make you purchase it immediately?
John Preto.
So the rumors are a satellite radio modem built into the new iPhone, which ought to be really interesting for those areas that you don't have cell service. But of course, you'll get incremental bump. I get the new iPhone every year, so I'll let you know how it goes. I do the trade-in on the AT&T plan, and they give me, $600 or $700 for my old one, and then I pay the differential on the new one. But camera improvements, screen improvements, more storage. But the radio modem looks pretty interesting.
Go, Jason.
Great question, Jasmine. I too am a bit of a sucker. I know I'm going to buy it no matter what. It's right in my market sector, and I need to understand it in order to use it, in order to teach people about it. What I would immediately go for straight away would be more battery life and some sort of coprocessor that allows the structured and the unstructured light to more easily go together. So, Alex, if you've done this, if you've ever done a zoom in, for example, like, you're looking at a grid and you do a zoom in, it really gets weird when you're using anything other than 1x.
2x, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see what they do there. Go ahead, Noah.
If it's going to be any feature, I would say halving the price, all right? Wishful thinking, of course, with the chipsets and everything, but I'm interested in hearing more about what they do with ProRes. They might bring that to the phone. That would be an interesting thing with the codec.
You got it, Bill.
Right now, we have basically a really cool iOS computer, but it only has one port, and it's a Lightning port. If I could ask them to do anything, it would be make some I/O and I hope it's not just a Bluetooth or a wireless thing, but some really fast I/O port so that we could use more of its capabilities, particularly in offloading video and allowing control and offloading audio, getting all that multiplex stuff working through a second port.
I think the only way they're going to get me to buy the new phone is to put a buy button on the website. I think that's going to really, otherwise I'm going to be really held back. I buy them every year. The thing is that I decide whether I'm going to buy a small one or a big one, but I don't decide which one because I'm usually trying to keep up with, we're trying to push the envelope. So I don't know what, I'll buy it. I personally think that Apple should flex. And the week before the event, just list prices and let you just we have 4 products and they cost this much money. And then just say, you can order it. You can get in that front of the line if you order now. They sell more than Samsung sells in their whole release. And no one even knows what it is. And it would just be Apple just flexing. Let me just show you how dedicated people are to getting the new version. So anyway, but they haven't, I haven't persuaded them that yet. Next question.
Danny Law in Malaysia is up next. If we were just trying to level up our webcam or shooting subjects that are approximately 10 feet away, what would be the minimum recommended sensor size? Also curious as to what Office Hours 2.0 requirements might be.
Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, so kind of two different things there. So if you are looking to level up your webcam, then the only difference that the sensor size is going to make to your look is to whether you want more dynamic range, less noise, signal to noise, or like I'm using a full frame sensor. So there's the shallow depth of field that you see behind me. You can get a nice image on a small sensor. The proof of that is any cell phone typically is a better image than pretty much any webcam. If you're looking for that 10-foot range, basically what's going to happen is that will help you a little bit because your f-stop, that's your lens more than your sensor, will tend to be, it'll move down as you zoom in. I would say, though, if you can get more light to your subject, you won't have to worry about the sensor size in these subjects.
Go ahead, Noah.
Yeah, to answer your question directly, a 1-inch sensor would be my personal minimum. But going back to what Josh is talking about is you're targeting a single part of the whole workflow, right? So there's the lens, the sensor itself, the age of the sensor. So there's other things to consider besides just the sensor, but yeah. And if you're at that 10-foot distance, what you want to do is try to distance your subjects, right? Yourself further away from the background. That way there's separation. That way you have a little bit of that depth of field, but the lens choice, those other things will also help.
Go ahead, Courtney.
I'd say micro 4/3 would be the minimum. But putting your webcam 10 feet away, I've never met anyone that has 10-foot long arms yet. And I have met Shaquille O'Neal. But, to have it within arm's reach is really handy. And if you can go with a wider lens and a larger sensor, you'll have more of background in focus, so you'll have less bokeh. But actually, if you're going to go closer, you might be better with a 1-inch sensor, a full frame sensor to give you better bokeh. But to keep the camera closer to the subject and the background further away will give you a better look. And I've gone to the Canon MFT, and I think it works fine for me.
And I think that, something like a Brio is fine for Office Hours 2.0. It doesn't have to be something that's bigger than that. I think that the next step up from there is most likely the Sony. I never think of the 6500 or 5400, or there's a bunch of them in there that I can't remember the numbers. But the Sonys are pretty good at $400 or $500. What you give up with those Sonys is that you can't control them from your ATEM if you decide to get one of those eventually. And it really makes life easier when you can hit focus, or other things like that. Making subtle changes. During the beginning of this event, I was like changing my color and changing my blacks just because I was there was something that had gotten reset, and that takes a long time when you don't have a control over it from the software. So, the first one that you'll be able to use software with is the micro 4/3, the little micro studios from Blackmagic. So those are things to think about as well. Next question.
Comes to us from Bo Cordell in Charleston, South Carolina. And Bo says, I have a couple of Neewer 660 LED lights looking for a grid add-on to help keep light off my background. Any suggestions?
Go ahead, Mickey.
So I don't know exactly what the Bo means about a grid add-on, but I would suggest looking into a flag. Some people call it the cutter. You can hook it up to put it on another C stand, or using a Cardellini or a super clamp, hang it up with an extra grip arm.
Courtney?
Yeah, if this is the light that he's talking about, it comes with barn doors that are attached to it. So put the light at a fairly steep angle and then bring the top barn door down so that the shadow just cuts above your head and then falls outside the frame behind you. And what I think he was talking about, a grid, is a egg crate, a type of grid, but it does the same thing as barn doors with a little finer control, because it keeps like the lower half of the light from going past the area where the barn doors would go. But I think you could control it with the barn doors that come with it.
Go ahead, Jason.
I'll pick up where he left off. Those particular lights are not incredibly bright, Bo. I'll put a link. They actually do make one directly for that one. I'll put the link directly in Mukana, but yeah, there is a grid made specifically for that light.
Go ahead, Bill.
I'm going to disagree here, because grids and Varndos do two different things, particularly with LEDs. The array of an LED is a whole series of little spotlights. They're tiny little directional lights, which means that if you close a barn door in them, all you're doing is blocking certain rows, but the light pattern really doesn't change very much. In fact, if you barn door down an LED fixture, you tend to get a Venetian blind type light of little stripes. So fabric grids are great for them. Fabric grids provide a depth so that you really do control spill with LEDs. And the great advantage is LEDs are lightweight, and that means that you want something lightweight on them. Grids, fabric grids, you can attach with Velcro. So just get the right shape. If you have a 1 foot panel, 1x1, get a 12-inch grid, put Velcro inside the light in a place you can mount it, put the grid on that, and you will get more control over spill that way than using anything else.
I had a DP one time, was upset that we had barn doors and no grid, and just grabbed one of the boxes that something came in, the Amazon box actually, took a razor blade and cut little pieces out of the piece, spray painted them black, and put little divots in, like cut little slots in them, and put a 3x3 up, and shoved it into the light. Worked great. So anyway, but it was a little bit of a afternoon project, but he was very frustrated that we didn't have any grids. So that's another option. Next question.
Noah Sargent in Fullerton, California says, can we talk through the current workflow of cutting and switching office hours?
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, the current workflow is just me or whoever's cutting, switching between active speaker view or gallery view. And if someone else shows something like a screen scrape of a web page while it's being talked about by someone else, I go and spotlight that person, like with the meters here, and that's about it.
There you go. It's very simple at the moment. It won't be for much longer, but we're enjoying it while it lasts. Next question.
Chris Widener is up next. Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. He says, Mac Mini colocation. Does anyone have any recommendations? I'm considering colocating a Mac Mini M1 16 gig for cloud production.
Jason?
I don't think you need 16 gigs. I hate to say it, but it just depends. I can't imagine that you're going to need 16 gigs in this case.
Go ahead, Tom. Is Tom here? Tom, can you hear us? Oh, there we
go. Sorry. I've been co-locating a Mac since the G4 Xserve, so I've got a little bit of experience with this. But the place that I have found to be the best so far is Mac Stadium. And right now I have a Mac Mini there. It's a little bit old. I think it's a 2014, but it's $35 a month, unlimited bandwidth, and I can access it whenever I want. And I use it to run a bunch of web servers, but also my main email server is there. And so you can't beat the price on that. And their service has been really good as well.
That's great. Jim?
Yeah, I agree with Tom. Mac Stadium's great. Their support's awesome, and they'll work with you to craft custom solutions if you need something more advanced, like virtualized firewalls and those kinds of things in front of your Mac. So yeah, I'd give them a shot.
Rupert?
I was going to take this a different direction, assuming that you wanted to like co-locate your own physical box and go and put it in a data center somewhere. Obviously, that's a pretty hefty way of doing it, but the likes of those guys would be Cyrus One or Flexential or something like that. Sometimes your local ISP will also have a enterprise co-location offering where you can get rack space from them.
You're Mickey.
I think I wanted to put my hand down, but yeah, I was going to say Mac Stadium as well.
Yeah, that's great. So we have a problem with the hand down right now. We're working on it. Next question.
Lauren Willoughby in Louisville, Kentucky's up next. What cloud storage service would you recommend for archiving video at the best price? I need to move seminar recordings off a shared Dropbox. People are complaining.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, that can be a bit of a problem. We tend to forget all the stuff we could chunk into the cloud, and we can't assume that everybody wants everything on their thing at any given time, and knows how to set the preferences accordingly. Long story short, the cheapest that I can think of is Amazon Glacier. It's offline storage. It is cold storage, but it's extremely inexpensive.
Go ahead, Grant.
I use Dropbox for all of my conferences, and the trick is, I think, is about how you share. And so when I go to share folders with lots of video in them, particularly, I share the URL. You can take a copy that in Mac and PC. If you have it installed on the computer, you can right click and copy Dropbox URL, and then that's just a shareable link that people can get without actually joining that folder. And that's the trick, particularly with really big folders. If you're sharing them with users, then they all have to have that amount of storage on their own Dropbox accounts. And so my advice on that, stick with Dropbox. It works awesome. They just gave me another terabyte for free. It keeps going really well, and just share with those copy URL.
Go ahead, Jonas.
I was on the search for something that actually also is enabled to give you a lot of download, because S3 can get pretty pricey, and if you then want to speed it up, you need to move it into a transfer region and all that. There are two main things that I found. The one is Linode, where you get 250 gigabytes and 1 terabyte of outbound traffic for $5 a month, which is amazing for data outbound. And then there's Backblaze. They offer 1 terabyte at, I think, $60 a year. And one of the cool things with both of those is they are part of the so-called Bandwidth Alliance by Cloudflare. So if you put your storage behind Cloudflare, you're actually no longer paying for outgress traffic. Cloudflare covers that for you, and you can get a Cloudflare CDN for free. So that's probably the cheapest way of doing it.
Go ahead, Tom.
So I've had to deal with this over the years. I've tried Backblaze, I've tried their B2, I've tried all the ones that you guys have talked about, but I found a loophole in something that I learned about through, I think, a Reddit article, and it's been working for the last 3 years. I have 53 terabytes in the cloud, and it's $10 a month. It's unlimited. So it's through Google Drive, but the trick is you have to sign up with your own domain and create a company account. But as long as and you're supposed to have a minimum, I think, of 5 people, so that would be $50 a month, something like that. However, they don't enforce the 5 people, so I only signed up 1 person, and then later I added my wife too, but they don't really care that you're under the limit. So what you end up with is unlimited storage. And I keep thinking, I mean, I guess there's always that risk.
You're waiting for the call. You're waiting for someone to call, which may happen right after the show.
Yeah, exactly. I debated whether to put my hand up after I was thinking about it. But it's been great. I have multiple computers syncing to it. I have my NAS. I have certain parts of my NAS that are set up to sync nightly just as a backup. So it's pretty cool for now.
I think the one thing that you have to think about is whether you're trying to do deep storage or whether you're trying to make it accessible storage. So deep storage is one piece of it. Accessible storage, another thing to think about is Vimeo. You have a lot of control if you're actually trying to make these available to people, but keep them private and have a bunch of other things. Vimeo is pretty effective at making that work. Go ahead, Jonas.
The method you just mentioned is actually out for almost 3 years now. There was a big YouTube video by Linus Tech Tips where they tried to upload the whole petabyte of storage. Caps out at about, I think, 2 or 3 terabytes a day. But if you're under that, you're probably fine.
That's great. Next question.
Chris Widener of Lafayette, Indiana is up next. I'm working with a nonprofit for a fall fundraiser, and they want to broadcast to 59 Facebook pages, 7 YouTube pages, 3 Twitters, and possibly more. Since Restream has had glitches lately, what would be the suggested alternative?
Go ahead, Leo.
My alternative actually would be Restream. Restream has had glitches. Everybody has glitches. I can list you glitches that Google have had, that eBay have had, that every single major cloud provider has had at one time or another. The issue isn't when they have glitches, it's whether they fix them and they move forward. Restream is used by millions of people, or does millions of streams a year. Yes, it will have outages, but they fix them and they fix them fast and they continue doing it. People can complain, but they will. The one thing I would say with you on that, on 59 Facebook pages, no problem. 7 YouTube, no problem. 3 Twitter is an issue. Multiple Twitters always cause an issue with any of the streaming platforms because of how they do their authentication. And it does actually cause problems and may cause you problems bouncing you out.
Go ahead, Jonas.
I think with Restream, it's more not about outages, it's more about rendering the frames weirdly, with the same problem we had for Todd. I just for the fun run a calculation if you would use AWS Elemental miniLive, because that's certainly possible. They can have that many outputs. You would run at around $37 per hour if you do a single one, and if you want backups, you run at about $70 per hour, and it could generally do that. And it would be really stable.
As someone that last fall did 3 to 5 events a week in Restream, I would not recommend it. So it was not one of our choices, and it was just a kind of a constant chasing of things. It wasn't particularly complicated, but it was enough that it just kind of burned me out. Like I was really excited about it when we started, not as excited when I got done. For this many, I think simple Restream stuff is probably okay. For this many outputs, I think that it would be really difficult to do this in Restream, and what you really want is in AWS. Like this is an AWS project. To be able to set this stuff up, you're going to find somebody like Jonas or Jim or someone else in Tucker or someone, pay them to build that up for you. Like it won't take them nearly as long as it will take you to do it, and get it actually working. The Twitter thing will also be solved that way as well, because you can cross those across multiple instances. So Twitter won't see, it'll just be an RTMP input for Twitter. The key is that you don't want to use, to get multiple Twitter outputs, you want to give it an RTMP and not do the authentication in the same way. So you need multiple accounts across that process. So that's the way around the Twitter limit. But this is, by the way, for those anybody into AWS, we're going to work on something that's not quite as big as this, but still complicated. So contact me if you're interested in and you have some experience or interest. Next question.
Christopher Sabato in Salem, Oregon is up next. We stream sports at 720p 60. Our new provider is transcoding the stream to 1080p 60, no 720 version. Will the end user see a better picture if I ask the provider to deliver a 720p 60 feed instead of 1080?
Leo?
Yeah, you will. And sports actually is a really important area where you do see it. So the example given in sports is if you look at things like tennis nets, you see the difference in the quality. You also see the difference because you're going at 60 because of things like with balls, the movement of balls. So it is actually important to be on there. So you will see the difference, I would say, on sport. It's at 1080 and it's worth doing.
Jason?
Yes, absolutely yes. The more you transcode something, the dirtier it gets, period. Up, down, sideways, doesn't matter.
I'm just trying to figure out whether it's something that the source is 720. If the source is 720, you might as well just put it out at 720 because 1080p, the load on the viewer is much, much higher. If the source is 1080 and you can stream it out at 1080, then 1080 is absolutely going to be better. But it just depends on what your source, where you're starting. And that's what it says we stream sports at 720p. So I'm not sure if you can go to 1080. If you can go to 1080 and run 1080 all the way through, it's better. If you're just bumping it up to 1080 as a scale up, you're putting more pressure and you're not going to get that much sharpness out of it because you started with 720. Next question.
Rupert McCrae in Dallas, Texas, and here on the panel is up next with, other than Macro IO and ZoomOSC ISO, are we aware of any other third-party Zoom software clients, and will this be an emerging space?
Go ahead, David.
I'm not aware of any other clients, but it's an interesting question because we're essentially MacGyvering Zoom to do things that it really wasn't intended to do. And I'm really curious if we shouldn't be looking for a different solution than Zoom for virtual production platform.
Yeah, go ahead, Tom. Oh, can't hear you, Tom.
Sorry about that. There's one I used back a while ago, and I hate the name. It's called It's MMHMM, and it's more of a virtual camera that works with Zoom, and it gives you a lot of options. But the website is mmhmm.app. I used it for a while, but the issue that a lot of these programs have, especially the ones that you would consider more useful and cool, is that they really suck up a lot of back-end power. And I was running it on a 2015 Mac Pro, and after, I don't know, not even a minute, I could hear the fans going at full speed. I could just feel that everything was becoming laggy. And to me, I would rather just have a simple meeting than have to deal with that kind of stuff. So I ended up backing off it after a few months, but it may have changed since then, or if you have a better computer, it may work fine. But it was interesting.
John?
An interesting product is the Cinemaker Director Studio, and the current version has a Zoom client built into it. So it's a 8-camera switcher that becomes a virtual camera in your Zoom meeting, but within the switcher there is a Zoom camera input. So it launches a Zoom meeting with a client. The people in the meeting then can become individual cameras on the switcher. So it's a little bit like OSC. I'm dyslexic. Yeah, OSC ISO sort of. People are doing that with Zoom rooms, and it does it all within that client. I'm testing it out this week, and I'll let you know how it goes in after hours.
Next question.
Moving on to David Paskin here in the panel from Miami, Florida. I'm running an M1 Mini via USB into a Scarlett 2i2. I know. And then into my Flow 8 via a 1/4-inch cable, getting a constant quiet hiss. Any ideas what might be causing this?
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I would first make sure that the entire audio chain is calibrated. So I would run a reference tone from the originating source, which is the Mac Mini, and then run that through the Scarlett and then into the Flow, and make sure the reference tone stays level and the entire chain is calibrated. After that, I would go piece by piece from the start and see where I start to hear the hiss. The piece of hardware that you start to hear the hiss in would be the culprit.
Go, Jason.
It's very hard to add to that. Use your headphones. Use them, liberally. Plug into every single piece. Generally, a hiss instead of something like a 60 millimeter or 60 hertz hum is the result of a cheap preamp. So yeah. Also, listen to your recordings in and see if it's not just something you're hearing in your headphones.
Go ahead, Noah.
I had an issue, not with the Scarlett, but I was USB powering a microphone that needed phantom power, so I don't know if that has anything to do with it, what you're dealing with there.
Next question.
Moving on, Douglas Carmichael's next, and he has this question. What tools do you prefer for designing and laying out racks and rooms? Would there be any OmniGraffle templates, or is Visio more capable?
Go ahead, Jason.
Allow me to introduce our own John Barker, who has made H2R gear. Yes, I've used OmniGraffle for years, and I think H2R gear is just as capable for this kind of layout. It's not designed to be pretty. It's designed to be incredibly functional and cross-platform and extremely fast. John, are you charging for that yet? I hope so.
Absolutely.
How much is it?
It is designed to be pretty. Thank you very much. Not a joke. The first price is like $5 a month or $10 a month, maybe, for the next one up.
It's a lot less than OmniGraffle. We'll put it that way.
you know, I think it's a different thing. If you're only doing, if you have a general purpose, I use OmniGraffle for a lot of things. So OmniGraffle is something that as a general purpose tool is very, very, very useful, you know, and I've been using it since version 1. so I've had it for a long time. So I still will use it. I am playing around with using here to record gear to start doing this, because the advantage really that gear has is that all the stuff's built in for you. Like with OmniGraffle, I'm constantly like, okay, I got to build this thing, and I got to copy it back from my template, or I got to, you know, do all this stuff. And there's a lot of them that I don't have to build, and they just and they also kind of know it's kind of a smart connection as opposed to a graphic connection. So it's pretty cool. Let's see. Next, sorry, Bill.
Yeah, there is a service that does OmniGraffle templates. It's called Graffletopia, and you search it out. Doesn't have everything. It's not the most comprehensive thing in the world, but if you're looking for things in classes like this, designing racks, I would at least take a look at it and see if you can find templates.
Doesn't have any of those things. Like it doesn't
have
have
any rack stuff.
No. Like
I've looked stem to stern. Believe me, it's
so you
not
can
there.
You can make. I mean, I use Graffletopia all the time. You know, like, so I do use it for a lot of things. For this specific purpose, you need inputs that are all there that you can snap to. And the people who make those make really good, pretty pictures. They just don't make things that are technically capable to do that. So that becomes the difficulty there. Next question.
James Brooks in New York is up next. He said, my live stream to Facebook was out of sync yesterday. I used the same chain, an SM58 to a Behringer mixer to the Canon C100 XLR line input, C100 ATEM, to the ATEM Mini via HDMI, selected the camera audio, ATEM Mini to OBS on a MacBook Pro, and a network cable. Thoughts? Thanks.
Yeah, my question would be, did it first start off in sync and then slowly drift off, or was it out of sync by the same by the same length all throughout? If it slowly drifted out of sync, then I would blame OBS and possibly the MacBook's thermal throttling, which happens after a couple minutes of hard use. If it's the latter, where it was the same amount of latency all throughout, I would dive into OBS's audio sync panel and line it up by, you know, doing a test pattern or doing a clap or a p-test.
Go ahead, Jason.
See, I'm running through this audio chain in my head, and I'm hearing like a bell, like a radio, ding, 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 and then I saw OBS on Mac, and it's like wham. Nope, that's the issue.
It's OBS on Mac. So it's gonna be, you know, the rest of the chain should leave it in perfect sync, and especially if it's different. I mean, something else was going on the Mac. You hadn't restarted it right before you used it, or something like that. But you know, OBS on Mac is not stable. Next question.
Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas says, what experiences are there of enabling end-to-end encryption in Zoom?
Jason.
Zoom's CEO got into a lot of trouble. What was it? Maybe a year ago, right at the beginning of COVID, by, you know, having a perfect answer and then putting his foot in his mouth. And he did this over and over and over again with respect to end-to-end encryption. Let's just say it's completely doable, and I don't believe at this point provable with perfect forward secrecy. That said, it's pretty stinking secure.
Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, so I looked into it when they first announced it, and when I heard that you couldn't, to enable end-to-end, you would lose these functions: join before host, cloud recording, live streaming, live transcription, breakout rooms, polling, Zoom apps, meeting interactions, one-to-one private chats. All of those really great things that we love about Zoom, you lose because it has to do an end-to-end and can't go through all the server that it would normally do for all of those features. And so I have found that security more than encryption has been important for us with some of our meetings. And so locking down a whole heap of things and then ultimately relying on obscurity for our security.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael. If you use a Mini DisplayPort to HDMI adapter like this one, and he has a link, to connect a Mac or PC to an ATEM Mini, will the system detect the resolutions the ATEM can accept and not offer ones it can't?
Go ahead, Jason.
I generally tend towards probably not, even if it says it's an active display adapter. If memory serves with that specific one, the StarTech, it doesn't do a two-way handshake, so you're going to get resolution. You probably will not get frame rate, but I'll remind you that you can always immediately just tell the computer to output whatever you want to for whatever reason, and at least the more recent ATEM Minis are going to reclock unless it is the very earliest ATEM Mini.
I think that the ATEM Mini defines the system by input 1. So if you have something else in input 1, it should report back on the other inputs.
Yeah, if you set it to auto, that's true. Yeah.
Next question.
Next question comes from Aaron Isaacs in Rochester, New York, seeking recommendations for rock-solid remote control for PowerPoint and or Keynote.
Go ahead, David.
I'm not sure how rock solid this is, but I love my page flip Dragonfly or page flip Firefly. It's a foot controller. It's as reliable as Bluetooth is, but it allows me to have do hands-free presentations.
Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, so if you're looking for the industry standard, it's the DSAN Perfect Q, and so there's a couple of different models, but the cheapest way into it is the is this what comes with the last little bag? I've got it here, a little Perfect Q Micro, and so this is the receiver for it. What's cool about this is it's got 2 outputs. You probably can't really see that, but it's got there we go. Yeah, snap. And so you can run 2 computers off of that at the same time. I'll see if I'll raise your standard remote.
Oh.
And go the laser pointer remote. and do you know what? This is very interesting. We had someone borrowed this from me, and just a couple of weeks ago, and there's a blackout button on this one, which is often really annoying. And a speaker came up and they specifically asked, have you got a remote with the blackout button? And we're like, actually we do, and no one has ever asked for it. It's normally been really annoying. But these
go find the trash can. It's around there.
So I bought it. It comes with the standard, so forward and back, almost idiot proof, although you often find that someone will press the wrong one. They won't press the big green forward button. They'll keep pressing the red back button and wonder why it's going backwards. And then this one has the laser pointer on it. So it was just a little bit extra, but that works really well. But then you can actually program the receiver as well for custom keyboard shortcuts, and so your mind boggles as to what you can do with that, right? So, because you can do any keystroke that you want to, and so it's not just sort of page up and page down for Keynote and PowerPoint. You can trigger all sorts of different things like ATEM switches and all sorts of stuff. So there's lots of cool things that you can do with it. Love it.
For at least the last 10 years, I mean, if you go to any major stage and look at what they have what they tend to call the pickle, and the pickle is a DSAN controller. One of the advantages of the larger DSAN controllers is that you can also have them they'll just tell the operator behind to go forward or back. They have arrows, and sometimes if you listen really, really carefully, they've turned up the volume too high, and you hear bloop, 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 bloop. And that is, if you ever hear that in a presentation, you know that they're using a DSAN because it's making that noise in the backstage and the person hasn't turned it down enough. And the reason you put a person in the middle, obviously, is to avoid when they hit the wrong button. A rehearsed operator will just not do the second forward or back or whatever. And a lot of times we don't tell the speakers that. So they'll say, there's something wrong with my controller. It's usually that the operator wasn't paying attention because they weren't controlling it directly anyway. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. Yesterday in after hours, I tested using OBS to convert the NDI output of a mimoLive session to SRT, and it worked very well. Boinx said that SRT is on the radar for native implementation in mimoLive, but would there be an SRT-to-NDI tool for macOS that could work?
Go ahead, Jonas.
If it's a M1, you could try Larry's Broadcaster. Otherwise, we had success using OBS for that. But,
next question.
FFmpeg also could do it.
Yep. Next question.
Next question comes from Douglas Carmichael. If you wanted to build a resilient virtual production studio at home, would most telecommunications providers run more than one circuit to a residence, or would you have to pay for specialized construction work to a non-commercial premise?
Go ahead, Leo.
So I'll talk about the UK because I can't say in America, but you will have to pay for it, and it is very expensive. And actually, it doesn't get you the resilience you think you would want, because it's still going to come down the same poles. It's going to come down the same ducting. So it may come from a different location. It's super, super expensive because to get full resilience, you need to come from a different exchange. The way to do it is to have different providers or different paths. So in the UK, I will use two providers, which is BT and Virgin, who use completely different environments, or the second resilient path, which I think is now very viable, is to use 4G as your backup path. So there are other ways of doing it, but getting the same thing from two people, even if you get the different routing into or routing into your building, somewhere along the path, it will join. And if that point dies, you've lost both connections.
Go ahead, Rupert.
Yeah, Leo's right. I mean, you can get whatever you want so long as you pay for it. But the challenge with getting things into residences is it can depend whether you're trying to get it through a residential service or you're getting it through a commercial service into a residential address. It's a very different kettle of fish. You will find some secondary providers who will manage all this for you and deliver it as a managed service. But again, it gets very, very expensive.
Go, Jason.
My new studio has triple overhead redundancy, and yes, it's absolutely critical to understand. So most ISPs will not run three. Let's say you've got coaxial cable. Comcast, for example, no matter how much you pay them, will not run 2 or 3 cables. And even if they did, it's pointless. It's completely pointless because it's all going to be running through the same DSLAM. That doesn't matter. What you need is a completely separate out. Get Starlink, get 5G, get 4G, get DSL. It doesn't matter. It needs to be routed. And if you're crazy like me, you actually check to be sure that it's leaving the city out of a different fiber-backed route too.
Yeah, we always use different providers for that. You can get commercial grade providers, especially in kind of the DC area. We definitely use things like level 3 and that type of thing into our facility, and those can be done. Getting into a residential location is expensive, to do that because they have to run special lines. But you can get that kind of stuff, but it's expensive, and you have to make sure you need it. But just having 2 providers will help a lot. Next question.
Rupert McCrae has the first of 2 highly rated questions in our queue from Dallas, Texas. In a recent post online, Dolby points to an article by soundsprofitable.com explaining how audio quality can impact a brand. They also cite a study from the University of Southern California on the subject. Is this valuable research?
Go ahead, Leo.
So, join After Hours, and we discuss this on a regular basis. The big problem is that to try and convince certain people and in certain industries that it's worth doing and looking good and sounding good is quite tough. They want to hear from experts that aren't actually part of their own company. That's the worst problem. If you try and tell anybody in your own company that you should sound and look better, they just think, oh, it's your end. And that's where having these sort of researches will be worthwhile. It's going to take time to move this needle and move us across to a better environment. And we are, in this one, leading the way, as we discuss quite often in After Hours. So it is worth having this sort of research.
Go ahead, Jonas.
It totally builds the brand, and seeing some keynotes from like an AV company that can put together a live stream where I actually can understand what they are trying to sell to me, it's 100% important. And in Germany, for all the brands that try to sell security, for example, they take it really seriously because they want to be professional and understood, and it just feels unprofessional if you can't understand whoever is talking about their D norms and all the technical stuff.
Yeah, I think that we keep on saying that it's not what people notice, it's what they feel. And I think that is the thing you always want to look at, is that they feel like this is bigger. They feel like it's more important. When you have shorter depth of field, most average people won't know why that you look like you pop out. But it occurs for them, and it impacts them whether they know it. In fact, I'll argue that how people feel about your video is far more important than what they notice, because it's subconscious. Like they they just think it's better and they don't know why. And and it's even better if they don't even notice that it's better. They're just paying more attention, subtly. So all these little subtle tricks that we're talking about are more powerful oftentimes than crazy graphics or all kinds of other things that you're having. Just that solid quality makes a huge difference. Next question.
Comes to us again from Rupert McRae, that next highest voted. According to Virtual Events Institute, benchmarking is set to be one of the next major learning curves for digital event organizers. What is the panel's interpretation of this terminology?
Go ahead, Jason.
I read that entire article. I'll put it in the Mukana chat. And there is nowhere in there where they say benchmarking that you can't perfectly substitute analytics, which I think is what they actually mean.
Yeah, I mean, I think people are trying to figure out how to measure the effectiveness of these events. I think that, and it's one of the things that people are very frightened of. Like, I don't know what that is. I will keep on coming back to one of the most important numbers is average view time. Like, average time that someone spends in your event is a really important thing. Outside of that, a lot of the R&D that we did 10 years ago was really related to, and this is not something you can do with all the event people that come, but when you do your presentations, getting a handful of people, when I say handful, over 20, to look at something with eye trackers is brutal. Like it will turn all your molecules inside out, and you'll feel very upset. Like it's one of those red pill problems, because you realize that no one's watching what you're doing. So how do you tie that back in? Next question.
Next question comes from Douglas Carmichael again, and he says, do you think the truck driver shortage could have an impact on the adoption of remote or cloud production, as production companies have difficulty finding or retaining drivers for their trucks?
Go ahead, Leo.
This is now becoming a world shortage. We have 50,000 truck vacancies in the UK, and we are having massive problems. I can't get gas for my barbecue. Sorry, that's propane, if that's the right word, because they can't get the stuff delivered from Europe, and there is just a massive shortage. It is now, some truck people are being offered £70,000 as a salary to start in this world. It's just going and getting worse and worse and worse. In fact, what they're now doing is lowering the bar for truck licenses in the UK, just so they can get people back into the industry. But I think it's going to be a big problem globally.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Sorry, I lost my panel view. Go ahead, Rupert.
Yeah, I think long distance truck driving is a challenge in the current climate. Being away from your environment, crossing borders over periods of time is kind of risky. But reading some of the articles last week about NEB, for example, a couple of those vendors who are pulling out have mentioned logistics in their reasoning. Just getting all that stuff and equipment from A to B and back again is a problem.
Good, Courtney.
Well, I think as far as production, transporting materials and stuff across country is one thing, but as far as production is concerned, the Teamsters are pretty well organized in production, and I don't know if they have a shortage. Maybe a lot of the Teamsters are opting to do long haul trucking instead of production driving, but production driving is a lot easier, and it is much more lucrative because of the hours and the longer hours, etc. So I don't think it's going to affect production, because production is not going to move people to remote cloud production, because if you're producing a dramatic scene, the actors have to go to the location or the sound stage, and the lights have to go to the sound stage, and the sets have to go to the sound stage and the location. So you can't do any of that virtually. It all has to exist in the same place for most regular production to go on. And I think the era of the Zoom version of a episode of episodic television has gone by the wayside, and everything's pretty much gone back into full production right now. And I haven't seen a shortage of truck drivers as far as production drivers yet.
We've had a shortage of trucks, so shortage, and which might be related to that. As far as production trucks, it's just really become very, very difficult. And what it doesn't affect the show that you're on, but it affects the next show. Like, you start talking down physical productions, because that's what really happens that people don't see is that production people will talk down a production if they feel like they can't execute it. And we're starting to get close to the point where, like, if someone asked me to do I have a show that I need a truck this weekend. If someone asked me to do another show like that, I'd say I can't do it. Like, I just can't, like, I can't find another truck. I found the one that I got, and I'm really happy to have it. But I can't go to another one. And what that does is puts a downward pressure on people doing those events when you can't execute them. Next question.
Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania says, what would be the ideal usage for acquiring a speed booster, a focal reducer? Are they best served as bridges between preferred camera bodies and lens families, or is there a more intentional application where you would select this solution, like in low light, perhaps?
Go ahead, Noah.
There's definitely several benefits, but for me, the top one is the low light capability, right? Focal reducer often gives you about a stop of light, depending on which one you get. And so I use that with my Sony FS5. It's a super 35 millimeter sensor. And with the speed booster, it's closer to a full frame. It's not quite, but it's very close. So you get that extra stop of light. And so with the 70-200, that 2.8 lens becomes a 2.0. Which is an incredible combo. But yeah, wider viewing angle is another benefit. Having EF lenses on a Sony camera or whatever camera you're adapting to is another thing. And then my personal recommendation would be don't buy the cheap adapters. Get the Matabones brand. It's not worth your time on the cheap ones. But native lenses are probably your best bet, and just skip the booster if you can.
Next question.
James Brooks in New York is up next. Since the MacBook is not a good fit for OBS, any recommendations on a PC to run OBS live streaming and encoding? It needs to be a laptop because of varying locations. Thanks.
Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, the unfortunate thing is that you're going to want to have an NVIDIA GPU for that. NVIDIA offers an NVENC encoder, which can take the process off of your the heavy lifting off of your processor. Barring that, though, if you want to use a 2-PC setup, you might not need the NVENC encoder, and you would have one that was just dedicated to doing your streaming and the other one that would be doing your production. Then you might be able to deal with it. In that case, you might be able to use your Mac as the production side of it, and you could use an NDI cross between the two.
Go ahead, Leo.
So coming back to the actual question, Lenovo, the one I use is the Lenovo Legion. They have the NVENC encoder. I find that they're really nice machines. They are gaming machines, but they don't look like gaming machines, the Legion models. And typically, you can pick them up from Costco, always seems to have them around the world.
Go, Rupert.
The Dell XPS 15, you can get those with a separated GPU inside. They're pretty good. Just make sure you just manage airflow. Make sure it gets plenty of airflow to keep it cool.
Next question.
Robert Soji in Los Angeles is next. Are the HDMI inputs different on the ATEM Mini line?
John?
They absolutely are. One of the best things about them is that all of the inputs have scalers built in. In fact, when I first got the original ATEM Mini, I made a video about that, talking about it, and people said, that's not possible, you must be wrong. But they all have scalers built in, which wasn't previously the case. Input 1 can be directly sent out of the output, so you can be caught sometimes by plugging things into input 1, and it works differently on that one versus the other 3. But one more thing to add is that on the ATEM Mini Extreme line, you can send input 1 directly out of output 1, but you can also send input 2 directly out of output 2. So on the ATEM Mini Extremes, you might want to try 3 to 8 if you're having any problems in 1 and 2.
And that is a specifically for gaming, right? I mean,
that was what they pitched it as. You could plug in your console and then directly send that back out of the ATEM Minis, so you wouldn't have any latency issues or degradations.
Go ahead, Jason.
That answer was perfect. I don't have anything to add.
All right, next question.
Tom Morton in Miami, Florida is up next. Could the office hours setup be used in higher education applications, for example, University 2.0?
Go ahead, Jason.
Pretty sure that I'd put our setup against just about anything. I think you'd be hard pressed to see a use case where ours wouldn't work pretty well.
Yeah, I think if you look at what we're structuring, it'd be pretty useful for classes and discussions, and especially if you start flipping the classrooms is when it really works. Is we're going to give you a bunch of content to look at, and then we're going to talk about it. But it maybe was designed for that kind of thing. So anyway, next question.
John Barker in Malmo, Sweden, and here on the panel today says, Alex has mentioned crazy graphics a couple of times already. Where does he draw the line when a graphic becomes a little too much?
When it stops serving the message. You know, I think that's the issue is a lot of graphics is fine as long as you're serving the conversation about what we're looking at. When I look at a football game, I was watching the Steelers game, they won, just in case you're wondering. Anyway, I was watching the Steelers game yesterday, and I think about the graphics while I look at it, and it's a lot of graphics across the bottom, but all of it's needed. It tells me how much time there is and what down it is. In fact, I would almost complain that the graphics were moving too slow and they weren't doing enough. They weren't giving me enough information. So that can be very, very useful in a heads-up display kind of thing. But the key is that it has to keep serving that. I think a lot of times we start seeing people using these giant, opens and these sweepers and and like lots of little bubbles going up and, all that stuff. And that stuff starts to really get annoying, pretty quickly. Like for instance, I like just putting a chat window and freezing it on top of a video is something. Now we have this constant thing that's pulling your eye away from the conversation. And I get that what the intent is to pull people into being more interactive, but there's other ways to do that. And you don't want to muck up the screen, in that sense. Now I think that lower thirds are super useful. It tells us a little bit more about the person or who I'm looking at and who I'm watching and talking. Super sources are great because they let us frame folks, in what's there. Even sweepers, when I'm taking you from one place to another, not a crazy sweeper, but a nice little sweeper that just says, I don't have a good way to get from here to here. I'm going to put it in. So I think a lot of those things make sense. It's just that we get into this situation where people want to do all kinds of like animated this and animated that. And we have to remember that number one is it's actually, if we're doing it into Zoom or we're doing it into a live stream, we also get into a situation where you're asking the temporal compression to do a lot more work. So it's not just a creative solution, but when you start doing a lot of those things in there, it's actually a technical limitation of the platform that you're starting to put more pressure on the stream. So there's a bunch of reasons to do that. But I think that a lot of the basic stuff that we think of as graphics is fine. I just think that you get into, we have clients that have us do very aggressive graphics, and I'm just kind of like, okay, sure. But did it make any difference in the conversation? Do people feel like they're more engaged? I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it wasn't just a distraction. And I think also we have a new generation of viewers that are used to pretty low level. They're used to a gamer poorly keyed over top of their game. There's not much else to it. So go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, I was just going to add about that idea that it's not broadcast, and sometimes we can see that we can make all these things, we can make all these graphics, and we can make things like Mix Effect is awesome for flying in and out and stuff, and that can work well at times, but it can get too crazy as well, and I think it takes away from the show that we're trying to do. And I think we have this opportunity now, because we've been doing so much of this, that we are creating this connection between you and I. And anything that gets in between that, I think can create a disconnection. And so the more that it looks like broadcast and looks like these lower thirds flying in and whatever, I think it can distract from this connection that we have. We have an opportunity to go away from what we've been used to with broadcast for so long, and get back to a connection between two people simultaneously.
And you see some of that as telling when you watch an Apple TV show or a Netflix show or whatever. It says skip intro, and everyone does. Everyone just go like, I don't need to see that every single time I come to the show, And I think the person that really pioneered that, J.J. Abrams, shortened the alias open. I remember there was a bunch of discussions where I worked about that, because what used to be a 30-second open was like 5 seconds of and Lost was the same way. He was just like, okay, I don't need to watch that. I don't need this huge open. Like, that's a good example of that process. Now you're going to see us experiment in Office Hours 2.0 with some graphics, super sources and lower thirds and some frames and so on and so forth. Part of it is that I think it actually will make it visually, it's easier for us to frame what you're paying attention to. But I also think that we are trying to speak into broadcasters listening, like trying to say, hey, they can't see it because of the way we do it. But if we do it in a way that they understand it, they'll go, oh, like this is a crazy thing. Like, because once they realize we're having a roundtable discussion with 20 people, I think we were talking about it in an after hours that I believe that the panel doesn't really work under about 10. Like, and the fact that I would tell people over and over again, never go over 4 or 5 people in a panel. The fact that we are not only comfortable with more than 5, but that it doesn't even really work that well under 10. We've taken it to a whole nother level, but people can't see that in the current structure. So if we add something that's just a step towards it without it being crazy, I think that it adds something to it. Go ahead, Josh.
I think like customers or manufacturers likes to put things right at the point of sale. They're like gimmicks that catch your eye because you usually just purchase things once. They get you at that point of purchase. It looks flashy and you bite on it. As to whether it's good taste or if it's just a fad, which I just learned was an acronym on office hours this week, I think depends on whether it does serve that function, whether it continues to serve that function. I think that's sort of the reason why everyone is fascinated with the virtual backgrounds.
Next question.
Comes to us from Simon Ray in Shrewsbury in the UK. He says, does the panel have a recommendation for a respectable sub $400 camera suitable for secondary cameras on an ATEM Mini or Extreme to give additional viewing angles in a workshop or kitchen-based show type environment?
Go ahead, Bill.
So anything with an HDMI output, that allows you to do a clean feed. In other words, get the graphics off the screen. In the early days, even things like GoPros had those, although they came out of having HDMI outputs unless you bought a secondary system, which put them over your price limit. I particularly, for my overhead shot for this one, used just a Canon Vixia 20. It's well within your price range and it has a simple clean output. And so there are plenty of camcorders. Just understand you need that HDMI output and you're going to be in a world of hurt if you don't get something where you can turn off all the menus and get a clean feed out.
Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, I was going to say basically the same thing. So I use a GoPro. This is a GoPro 3. It's still going strong. It has a clean out and works well. And then I also recommend like the little Sony camcorders. The same type of thing. You get them for that sort of money, less than. And it's a mini HDMI out, which is annoying, but it works fine. And they give a really nice clean image and you can zoom them in and that works great.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I agree with most of what everybody said, but remember one thing you're going to give up is color balancing if you're not going with the Blackmagic where you have access to the individual RGB controls. So you're going to, you got to take what you get with the Vixias and the, they'll all do Rec 709. So if you get them all lined up to the same grayscale and do white balance, you'll get them close. But you can't do really fine control. And the other thing it gives you is if you go with the camcorders, you get automated focus. So that's great in a cooking show where you're holding something up or you're, focusing on a different part of the work area. So it can autofocus for you, which will save you a lot of headaches.
Next question.
Moving on to Jonas Dattel in Stuttgart, Germany. Is there a way to see all the members of the Office Hours Discord on a map if you're searching for someone local to you?
Oof, working on it. We had it. So here's the thing that there is a capability inside of Google Maps to do that. If we have people, it's part of why we ask you for your city, is so that we could eventually go through and import those and run them out. Into that process, because with Pixel Core we used to do exactly that. We had 2,000 members and there were 2,000 locations, and you could see these little dots everywhere. The problem is the rendering that QuickTime that Google Maps did back then was very rough, and it still is from the stuff I've seen. Is it bogs down when you get over a couple hundred people, a couple hundred tabs. So that's been the challenge that we've had, is to make it more efficient. And but Google Maps is the Google Maps API is the easiest way to do it. And if someone built something that would be able to easily import a CVS, we could probably figure out a way to send it to them, so that we figured that out. So, but yeah, that's the lift, is to figure that out. Next question.
Comes from Rupert McCrae in Dallas, Texas. And he says, what workarounds are there for Zoom not being able to send automated reminders for recurring meetings?
Not being able to? I'm not sure if, go ahead, Rupert. It usually
So,
is.
so for meeting, for webinars, it'll send it. If you have a daily recurring, it'll send a daily recurring reminder to your registered attendees, but it won't do that for meetings.
Oh, right. Two different forks. I mean, like, I don't know. One team thinks it's a great idea, and the other team does not think it's a good idea. And I think that that's probably what I don't think. It is frustrating. Some of the the other thing is that there's something in the meetings and the auto response that's actually better than some webinar. You know, there's like the two different pieces of registration for meetings and webinars, the fact that they don't match up. One of the reasons we use webinar for this, I had thought about meetings early on, was specifically to the point that you have. I think it's the opinion of two product managers is my guess. So I don't think it's any bigger than that. Next question.
Brian Becker in Charlottesville, Virginia is up next. He says cloud recording captures in restream and hop-in from full 9+ hours events resulted in videos with severe audio sync quality issues that were not present in our live feed or in YouTube recording. Any ideas of what might have gone wrong?
Welcome to cloud recording. You're asking a computer. This is why we still have HyperDecks and we record ISOs and we see what the signals are that are coming out and make it work. The hard part is that a lot of these systems are managing hundreds or thousands of people all at the same time, and it can just get overloaded. Literally they're putting too much pressure on the system, or there's glitches that are system wide. But cloud recording is a tricky business. It's easy and it works most of the time, but you're going to find that this is going to be a problem. I mean, we've been dealing with this for a decade. So if you really want the cloud recording to mean something, you're going to record it with an ISO output with a piece of hardware. Like, that's how you are sure that you're getting it. But that's, and it just, we've seen this for a decade, so there's nothing new about it. And unfortunately, it's going to continue to be a problem. And we see it with Zoom, we see it with Hop-In, we see it with everything that we've used. We've seen some kind of glitches in these areas. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. He says ESPN is hiring for a live from home technician, and they mention linking talent to a control room or mobile unit. With the success of the Mobley process and the Belfast method, what's to stop removing both altogether, latency notwithstanding?
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I think that while there are many possibilities and we can do a lot of things with just sending equipment over to talent and have them set it up themselves, there's still a lot of value in terms of what exactly can be set up when you have a crew on site. I mean, with most talents at least, you can't ask them to put up a couple of REM8s and to do frequency scans on their own and tune everything. So while you can do some, to an extent, some sort of production with just sending them gear, higher production value requires crew on site.
The other thing is there's always going to there's things you can do in hardware in an uncompressed environment that, and with many channels and all the other bits and pieces that you need, that are going to be very hard to do in the cloud. And that, because you have to compress it most of the time to get up there, or you have a limited number of things that you can get into the cloud. So those things are going to be something that you need hardware to do. And then in addition to that, how ESPN approaches it and how we're trying to approach it with some of what we're doing is very different, with a much different cost per unit. So we also want to look at the fact that, they're going to come at it in a different way. But I think the hardware will be around for quite some time, mostly because it's, again, I have projects where, I've got, 20 cameras that are, that are producing 4K, and we're recording 4K locally, but only uplinking 1080p, or doing something in one frame rate and doing another frame, and all those things, and one has to be compressed and the other one doesn't. And so there's a lot of things that are going to, eventually, probably it'll be mostly in the cloud, but it's going to take a long time to get there. Next question.
George Kennedy Jr., our friend from Washington, D.C., says, why do you choose not to use lower thirds on Saturday's show? And this is for John. I thought it looked better without it.
Go ahead, John.
This is a great question because of the word choose. We were going to show graphics. Lower thirds was the only thing. In fact, I had a template ready to go, which just had the names of each person. and any social comments that I wanted to show. But some technical issues got in the way for us, unfortunately, and the graphics were the first thing to fall. I did want to show the name of each person just so that people were definitely aware of what they were called and where they were coming from. But like you said, it actually works out nicely without mucking up the screen, as you said, Alex, earlier.
I actually missed when I looked at the show. I was missing the lower thirds. Like I didn't know who was talking or who they were. I didn't know them well enough to. I knew Aaron, and you, and I didn't know the rest of the crew as well. So it was definitely something that I missed in that environment. Next question.
Moving on, Douglas Carmichael's back up. Do you find that moderating disputes and quelling arguments is easier in a virtual community than in a physical group?
Go ahead, Leo.
No, I don't. I actually find it's easier in a physical environment. Why is it difficult in a virtual environment? Because you don't actually know who you're dealing with at certain times. It's hard to actually see. People use pseudonyms for their names. They will change who they are. And you also lose when you're dealing with people on virtual, sometimes doing it, particularly in writing, you lose the nuances of what they're saying or understanding of what they're actually saying. It's very easy to misinterpret things. So, and even in just the fact that I've been able to say a paragraph and a half in about 30 seconds is much easier in direct when you're actually seeing people face to face. So online can be quite fraught in dealing with these sort of problems.
Go ahead, Jason.
Depends very heavily on your group. If you have a known group, for example, I think the Discord, I don't know, but I think the Discord that we have at office hours is probably pretty easy to moderate because we know each other, we talk to each other, and there is a desire towards civility. And if you don't have that, then I think you'll find it's very different. But if you do, I bet it's about the same.
Good, Courtney.
Well, if you're a good moderator and have control over mic muting, it makes a big difference because you can just, if somebody keeps interrupting and won't let a person finish, you just mute their microphone and then they won't be able to interrupt. And so you can control the flow of conversation and bring it back to a more civil discourse than, a Maury Povich situation where people are just shouting at each other continuously.
I find that getting rid of religion in politics and bad words goes a long way. Not mostly because it just pushes a lot of people out, like people who wanted to be that way. It's just not an environment that their roots grow well. But I think that there's advantages and disadvantages to both. I think that there is an advantage to an asynchronous connection where you can think a little bit before you say things. So when you have an online situation, especially not in video, but just an online text thing, now you can think about something for a little bit before you respond. And sometimes that's a really good idea, is to kind of think through that, that process just a little bit. Now I know that my tendency, which is usually the thing that I worry the most about, is I can be much rougher on text than I am on person. So when I'm in person, I'll be paying more attention to you, and I'll be, having in text, I'm sitting there in my idea, and without a response, I can be pretty rough. So I get concerned about that with online. Next question.
Cherry Cheetah in Dallas, Texas says, what type of success have people had, good and bad, with using Microsoft Teams for high-level broadcast with vMix?
Go ahead, Rupert.
I have seen Teams transport reasonable looking video. Typically, though, that's most successful I've seen when it comes out of NDI. Now, to get NDI out of Teams, you need to have administrative access on the back end. You need to enable some features. So if it's not your if it's not your Teams account, you're going to maybe have trouble accessing those features, or if it's a corporation. But if you can get it enabled and use NDI, you can. It will transport decent looking video. If you're trying to screen scrape through the client, that client is just, first of all, it updates all the time and starts acting differently all the time. And even if it's stable, you'll find that your pinning and stuff just doesn't act the way you'd like it. And your UI elements are going to be kind of unpredictable in what might pop up where. It's also important to keep in mind that Teams is now morphing a consumer product, which is a separate pipeline and a separate client and a separate platform. So don't get too confused.
Next question.
Josh Kaufman's up next from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and he asks, what are some steps to improve Wi-Fi calling features offered by cellular providers, useful in locations with poor cellular signal, but subject to the streaming quality limitations of Wi-Fi? Would a dedicated VLAN or selecting radio channels help?
Go ahead, Jason.
Well, I'll answer the last part of the question first. Probably not. A little hack of the iPhone. I have had pretty good luck adding, if you turn on Wi-Fi calling real quick and then add Wi-Fi calling for other devices and then go back and turn Wi-Fi calling off, that will disable the default routing table, but still kind of a weird little workaround that actually allows it if it's necessary.
Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest using an Ethernet adapter with the phone. So you can with the iPhone, the Lightning, the camera, USB camera adapter, and then connecting an Ethernet adapter. I have seen Wi-Fi calling enabled when that has been plugged in and Wi-Fi is technically turned off. It's only Ethernet that's working. That could be a great connection.
Go ahead, Courtney.
A couple of things to watch out for is that if you have dual band Ethernet in your home, 5 gigahertz gives you more bandwidth, which you probably don't need for just voice communications, and 2.4 goes through walls a lot better. And I find that if I have my phone on a Wi-Fi calling and I wander out of the range of the Wi-Fi, it doesn't easily or usually switch to the cellular signal very a lot of times it won't switch to the cellular signal at all. It'll just be a crappy Wi-Fi signal, pardon my French. But, or it'll, try and lock on to some free Wi-Fi signal that is out there that, your cable provider may provide coming off of one of your neighbor's cable boxes. So you got to watch out for that and limit it to your own SSID and try and stay within range of the Wi-Fi. And remember to turn off your Wi-Fi if you leave the house, because that will force it back onto using the cellular network, which is usually more reliable away from your known routers, which you have access to.
Every day I spend more and more time just using the Apple FaceTime audio for anybody who's got the blue bubble. So if you have another iOS device, I've just found that my cellular is becoming less and less reliable. At least where I live, I don't know why. And so I have more and more trouble in my house for some reason than I had before. And so as a result, I just keep moving away from it. And it's, the audio quality is much higher. And what's funny is that I found, to Grant's point, maybe take an iPad and you connect it to an Ethernet, and then you make a phone call with your AirPods. You can wander all over the house and get near perfect audio all the time. And so the iPad has a much more powerful transceiver to make that actually happen. And so it's a weird habit that I've gotten myself into, to have an iPad positioned in the kind of the geometric center of my house, but it's made it much easier for me to wander around the house and have very nice, clean conversations. Go ahead, Rupert.
If you have multiple access points in your house, for example, and have a system like Ubiquiti or Meraki, make sure you have the zero handoff features enabled in that system. That'll allow your client to hopefully roam as seamlessly as possible between your access points if you move around. Having said that, try to stay still.
I like to wander. So if I'm on a phone call, I like to wander around and think. So that's the hard part for me. Go ahead. Next question.
Robert Soji in Los Angeles is up next. Are there better alternatives to the Samsung T5 and T7 SSDs?
No. I mean, so for specific things, I use the NVMEs, the Samsung NVMEs. I think they're the 960s, I want to say, or 980s. I can't remember off the top of my head. And I have my own enclosures. And so these have fans on the front that literally pull cooling through them. And that's what I'm using to capture off of Blackmagic 12Ks. So because they run at 800, 900 megs a second. And so they still degrade a little bit after they're half full, but they are much higher performance. And the price is relatively the same. But as far as buying a pre-packaged one, they do take a little bit of engineering. Like there's heat sink tape, and there's things, and it's a little art project to put them together. So I think that's the only thing that I would be careful of. It's not just something you buy and use. And mostly what I use are T5s and T7s. Next question.
Paul King in Northern Virginia. What are you most excited about to hear from tomorrow's Apple event?
Nobody has their hand up. Everyone's like, we're excited because there's going to be things that we can do. Yeah, go ahead, Tom. Can't hear you, Tom.
All right. Can you hear me? Yeah,
Yeah,
sorry. I have to say, I most look forward to the events themselves, the production of them. I kind of miss the old days a little bit when there were close to no rumors and the whole thing was a big, like, Christmas morning surprise. But I still look forward to just looking at how they message things, how they tell their story. And you can just see the attention to detail that they put into every single thing that they do. And there don't seem to be many companies that do that these days. And so I really appreciate that part of it. And then whatever they announce, I always want to buy. So it's kind of a non-issue.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I'm expecting this to be a little retail oriented as opposed to technology oriented because it's kind of the lead into the holiday buying season. That said, everybody's going to be probably wondering what's going to actually come out and what's going to get delayed out of the rumor mill stuff because of all the chip shortages and everything impacting the supply chain. Everybody's dealing with that, even people with unlimited resources, basically, like Apple. So it'll be interesting to see what actually gets out the gate of the rumors and what doesn't.
Go ahead, Jason.
I love watching Apple explain things. It has been the best possible way. I will go back and watch Apple's keynotes when I have to explain something that is technical and complicated to somebody who isn't used to it. That's always my favorite part.
Yeah, it is for me, as much as it is a process of whatever they released, it's the gold standard for how to communicate about your product. Like, they are, the level of detail, the level of investment, the level of process is high, 2 or 3 orders of magnitude higher than everybody else's ability to do it. And it's not because other people couldn't do it. It's just they don't. They don't put that level of effort into it. And so if you're thinking about how to build a video about something, it's really good to look at like how Apple does it. Like, if you're thinking about how should I build my slides, Apple's how you should build your slides. like that is, there's not any other, like, that is the way your slides should look. If it looks any other way than that, you're wrong. It's just, I watch these slides that are just like so full of things, and it's just nice and clean, communicates what you want, supports what you're saying, and puts those out. And I think that that's the thing that's really interesting, as far as it's always a learning curve. As far as what they're going to announce, I'm excited to see how they what they're going to talk about related to AR. They keep on talking about it. There's a lot of hints inside of their invite that say something is about AR. They just haven't quite told us what that is. So I think that their AR is going to take a big center stage to what they're talking about. I don't think we're going to see any new pieces of hardware that are related to that, but I do think we're going to see an increased interest, especially, I believe, most likely going to talk about object capture. Because they told developers about it, at WWDC, gave them an opportunity to build apps. I wouldn't be surprised for Apple to show off a couple of those apps, that developers have created to build the models. And as we talked about before, the payday for being in a keynote is big, and it helps to kind of drive development. Next question.
Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Timecode could be a second-hour topic, but what are good examples of implementing this in a low-budget setting versus an event with extensive post-processing required?
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, if Josh is if you're talking about using timecode within material acquisition or in principal photography, you can treat LTC timecode as if it were just an audio signal. So on the lower end, you could have a single timecode generator, split that off with passive splitters, and feed that to your audio recorder and your individual cameras. On the medium range, like what is traditionally done on sets, is that each camera has a timecode generator that you jam from your master timecode generator, which is typically the audio recorder. And you've put one timecode generator on each camera. On the higher end, you would have a house clock that all equipment jams to.
Bill?
So in my practice, as somebody who makes videos for most of my living, timecode has become both incredibly more important and incredibly less important simultaneously. Back in the days when I worked exclusively in broadcast, I lived and died by time code on everything. And, even in things like sending out basic review copies to everybody, everything had visible time code, and we could all talk about it that way. With the advent of me moving into Final Cut and having more metadata to be able to find things, I find I search by and look for time code far less than I ever did before. It's still a useful communications medium, but I just think it's changing. And there were also these inexpensive cameras don't do full SMPTE the way they did. They have, some of them have other types of timing systems that are equivalent to time code. At the professional level, there's still nothing that substitutes for it, but there's just more chances for timing and more optional ways to get things in sync than there ever been before. So as I say, I'm bifurcating. It's more important and less important at the same time to me, which is weird.
Go ahead, Courtney.
One thing to remember, in the non-professional cameras, you'll only get plus or minus one frame, because when you start the camera, it starts generating frames, and it's not necessarily taking the time code into consideration when it's generating those frames. So the time code frame could transition halfway through your video frame, so it's got to pick the next nearest frame. So you have a plus or minus one frame error rate if you're not synchronizing the camera's vertical transition between frames with the timecode's transition. So they have tri-level sync output on the more professional timecode generators, which can drive the external sync input on more professional cameras, which maintains the tight synchronization between frame transitions.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, has anyone used a Cloud Guru's courses for learning AWS? I like the Cloud Playground sandbox they offer, which has inbuilt limits, it says.
Go ahead, Jim.
I have. I definitely recommend using them as part of your curriculum for getting certifications, but just don't stop there. Definitely also use documentation and practice outside of that sandbox, which of course is limited to the topic they're talking about.
Next question.
JJ McKenna in San Rafael says, based on mention of a legitimate source for Stream Decks, how many Mickeys are they going for these days?
Go ahead, Leo.
So the 32 keys on Amazon is going around about 240. The 15 key has just dropped down. The first generation ones are cheaper. In the UK, the first generation, they just dropped them down to under £100 each this weekend.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, says, with ultra-fast 1 gigabit per second or more connectivity to homes, along with 3D standards like USDZ, could you see applications like virtual shopping taken to a new level? For example, 3D views of products and being able to fit them into your space.
Go ahead, Leo.
The advantage, I love this question from Douglas, and he comes up with some great questions. Once we increase bandwidth, we will find places to use bandwidth that we never thought of before. And there's loads and loads of opportunities and examples. One of the things I had at the weekend, a friend of mine, we were away, and his washing machine now has 95 different cycles that he can program from his app. And they actually don't tell you to program from the thing. The one version we couldn't find the Axe Murderers Clean the Blood program cycle, but it must be there somewhere.
Oof. Go ahead, Jason.
I hate to say it, but the future is now. I go back and forth with USDZ all the time. It does not require a high-speed connection, and it is being used by major retailers today for show me this in your space. IKEA does it. Apple, of course, was one of the first to do it, and Amazon is also adopting it too. So it's awesome.
Yeah, it's going to change a lot because a lot of us are still trying to make decisions and you can't quite figure out. I once ordered there's an antenna that you can get for the Comtrex, these little belt packs that we have that we can kind of listen to. It's mostly, used for, for production. And when I bought the antenna from B&H, I expected it to be about this long. Yeah, it's like 6 feet long. Just in case you're wondering, it's just like this giant antenna that you'd see on the back of a big truck, so anyway, it was that kind of thing is the kind of thing that we can fix when we can say, oh, I want to look at this. I'm ordering yet another desk for my little space, and I couldn't quite figure out how high is that going to be and where is it going to sit? And I can try to do measurements, but being able to just sit there and just open up my phone and just say, show me what it'll look like in the space is going to make a big difference. I also think that we're going to get to a point where we want to order something and we have, some kind of object here, and we can just download it. Like I'm going to talk about this model, a model of this. So this is the Elemental Link, the newer one. And Jesse built a USDZ model of this, and I'm going to put it up so that people can, people can download it and look at it. So it's a, those kinds of things. Like, how big is this actually here? And can I turn the knobs? And I think you're going to end up with situations where I can turn the knob. You can build all the behaviors eventually into that system. So when you think about, right now we're in baby steps of, we can have an object. But what happens when that object can do everything? What if you could learn how to use a Mix Pre 3 before you bought it? I can turn the little dials and I can hit the little buttons and it'll do the thing that, I have audio going in, and I can sit there and just play with it and rotate it around, connect things to it. And all of those things are there, and it gives me, now I understand how that works, and I want to buy it, and it will replace our need for many things, not everything. Couches are hard to buy without sitting in, but it will replace our need for showrooms for many, many things if we can just sit there and play with it and see how big it is. Like with a washer and dryer, if I knew what the features are, and I can visualize, will it fit into my space? And I see this thing, what am I really going to get from going to Best Buy? So I think that's where we're going, and it's going to be a big, big market. Go ahead, Leo.
Yeah, I mean, 20 years ago, I was at a conference where I was talking about live streaming and the evolution of that in sport. And, I turned up on there and I said, in the future, you'll be able to sit there and watch your football games on here. And it was like, this is 20 years ago. And the problem is the bandwidth wasn't there at the time, but what we are able to do in the future and what we can get with the bandwidth, as you talked about, the ability to sit there and say 3D printing of stuff that you can actually print. There are just so many opportunities and applications that when you get everything connected, that will, at the moment, it's a limitation. If you started connecting everything up, you will have problems. You'll run out of the bandwidth, but it will make such a big difference.
I did, just to your point, what you just said, I did have this experience yesterday. My daughter was playing a baseball game, and my son and I were watching the Steeler game. And so I just wasn't impacted by it. I was watching it on YouTube TV. So we were watching it, and we left at the end of the third quarter. We went to the baseball field, and between changes of teams, it takes a little while and American baseball is very slow. Anyway, so between changing innings, we kept on watching the Steeler game on my iPhone, and we were just watching it without any audio. We would just sit there and just crumped around it, and we hit pause and we watch the baseball game, and then we go back to watching the Steeler game, and then we go back to watching the baseball game. And there was some point in the middle of it, I was like, how have we gotten here? This is amazing. Like, it knew exactly where I was when I left. I just picked it up somewhere else, and it was good, because when I left, that we were losing. So it was really important to get back to where we were winning. All right, next question.
Robert Soji in Los Angeles is up next. Any recommendations for an on-location plug-in low-cost AC voltage monitor?
Go ahead, Jason.
On one of the first office hours, I remember Alex's face when I recommended the P3 International Kilowatt. It's just, what? And it's really a fantastic piece of kit. I'll put the link in Mukana.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, there's a lot of them on Amazon. Just do a search for AC voltage meter. They're all pretty much the same thing, but you could also measure voltage with a simple multimeter if you already have that on hand.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I might point out that the kilowatt really measures current, not necessarily voltage. But I did find this one on Amazon for about $14, and this is unlike your regular 3 LED plug-in tester that shows you, open hot, reversed hot, ground fault detection. It has a push button here for testing GFI conductors, and it gives you those 3 LEDs, but it also gives you a digital readout of the voltage. Which will let you know if you're on you're on a 240 volt leg when you should be on 121 volt. But it doesn't show you current consumed at all. So,
go ahead, Rupert.
If you're wanting to manage voltage as you're using it, or current, you're going to plug something through it rather than just plug something into an outlet. Some of those plug-in kilowatt meters, I just don't. I look at them and I just don't feel comfortable pulling kilowatts through them, just as a plastic device. So I would look at the Wattbox range.
And remember that your higher end UPSs from like companies like APC will have that information on them. so you can actually, like, I get my standard is I just buy 1500 VAs, from APC, and they can page through lots of information about how much time you have and how much the draw is and those types of things. It's really valuable. Next question.
Moving to Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas, and he mentioned Zoomtopia is being held on the new Zoom Events platform. Zoom Events requires either the desktop or mobile Zoom client is not being able to use a web browser to access a virtual event, a barrier to entry.
Go ahead, Leo.
Hooray! At last, we actually will have some level of sanity. The web browser for these sort of events is so poor, and it's great that they're actually finally saying we're going to do that. The email also said that you have to be on the latest version. They've probably woken up and realized how horrible it has been to produce events on Zoom where every single time you try and do anything, nothing ever works because half the people in the room are looking at an old browser. And it's obviously your fault because you're running the event, even though they've never updated their client.
Yeah, I think there's a tension between, trying to make it accessible to anybody who wants to do it no matter what, and lowest common denominator. And lowest common denominator just drags down a show. And so there are definitely places where we allow the web browser is fine, but if you're trying to do anything remotely interesting, you have to get rid of it as quickly as possible. So because it's a lowest common denominator problem. Next question.
Tom Morton in Miami, Florida says, do you have any recommendations for rural on-location broadcasting connection, somewhere with 10 megabits per second as the advertised max speed?
Go ahead, Rupert.
So if there's any kind of hard line available, I would get it no matter the speed as a starting point. And then you're going to want to look up to see whether there is a rural wireless fixed wireless providers in that area, somebody doing long haul Wi-Fi, and then start looking at your mobile coverage for 4G services, look at all the providers, and then get on the waiting list for Starlink maybe, and then start looking at something like a PepWave or LiveView to start bonding all that stuff together and just try and put together the best package you can.
Go ahead, John.
You're absolutely right. Ripper put it pretty nicely there. One other thing I would say is if you're going to do a rural event of some sort, and a lot of people are going to descend on that area, you have tested in the morning and everything's working great and the speed is great, and then all these people come and they ruin it for you. So one fix for that in the past has been to get something more directional, like a directional antenna, pointed at a completely different mast in a different direction for 4G, and then you should be able to counteract all those people descending on your location.
And Mickey?
Yeah, to add to what Rupert mentioned, aside from searching for if there's a wireless ISP, a WISP in your location, you might also want to consider setting up your own point-to-point bridge, like using something like air fiber.
One thing that to expand on what Mickey just said, we literally will go to, this is where my location is, we'll walk around to the highest point, pull out binoculars and start looking at what we see around us. And I've literally walked up to a homeowner and say, I'll pay $100 if I can use your bandwidth, and just put a satellite behind them. I said, as long as, I'll pay you on the other end of this, or I'll pay you half up front and half later. I paid up to $500 for someone's connection just because I needed to have it. And it was like, 8 miles from where I was. All I did is look at it, pull out my compass, look at it, figure out where I am, figure out where that is, figure out what the GPS is, go over to that place, tell them we're looking for a thing, have someone on the other side to make sure that I can actually see it. And then we just purchase the bandwidth. Now, the best way to do that is usually ISPs will definitely do that. And so we've definitely been able to find ISPs that we can see. So you can get pretty guerrilla about those things. And it's just an extra, it pays off their internet bill for the month. And you'd be surprised at how many homeowners will say yes. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and he says, Genesis, the band, will be embarking on a short tour of the UK and US starting in November. Considering that the US requires a negative COVID test for entry, wouldn't it take a lot of time for the NHS to return a full crew's worth of tests before the US leg?
Go ahead, Leo.
So no, we have a COVID app. Everybody in the UK now can have their COVID passport on their mobile phone with a code, and it is being used where it needs to be used. To leave this country, you also need a COVID test. It's pretty standard actually throughout the world now. It's coming really, really fast, and this is for people who travel. It's happening.
Yeah, go ahead, Rupert.
And as well as the public system in the UK, there is also a thriving private health market there. So you can other ways to get through that pipe.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, over here for whenever I need to do COVID tests for, say, shoots, I could go online, book it, drive 10 minutes to the testing site and get the results less than 9 hours later. And also a lot of productions partner with clinics that do home testing, or they go to wherever the person is, and they're able to test 100 people like within an afternoon.
Yeah. When we work on productions, the production pays a premium for it, but we are able to, get ahead of, they'll set up a specific space, or they'll basically block out a current testing site there's other people coming in, but they're on a longer line, and we have one person that's dedicated to testing us. And we just rope through it, and it takes very little time. And after the first couple, you get used to it, and you just kind of lean back and let them do whatever they need to do to your nose. And yeah, exactly. You go back and lean forward. You find that you can keep on surfing the internet while you're waiting, and right up until the moment they go, okay, and then you go like this, and you go back down, and then you go back to what you were doing. So it's not that bad. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's back up with, which of these desktop tripods, and he has a link there, would you recommend for using a DSLR like a Sony a6300 or higher end camera like a Blackmagic Design for a desktop camera behind the monitor?
Go ahead, Jason.
I'm going to give you generalized advice because that is a huge category. Of course, it's going to matter as far as the legs are concerned, based on your monitor and your viewing angle. The thing I would stay away from would be a ball-headed joint, especially on the new Blackmagic cameras, because the base plate itself is heavy and the camera itself is actually not very heavy. But, in aggregate, if you're going to go with a mini tripod, don't go with a ball head.
It's funny because I would reverse that, because it's so hard to get it just right with just the legs, so I would want to either have a ball head or have an adjustment underneath, but one or the other, because otherwise it's just really hard to level off. Next question.
Tom Morton in Miami, Florida is up next again. What will be the first killer app for AR?
Go ahead, Jason.
Okay, assuming it's not one of the ones that's already out for object capture, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say the first killer app for AR is going to be FaceTime.
Go ahead, Josh.
I think something that takes advantage of data with the visual. So something that recognizes something and give you a tutorial like how to do something. Or if you were able to put like info blots above people, like who is this person? What is their vital information? You would be like superhuman just looking through a crowd of people or even in an event.
I think it's going to be maps integration. Just picking up and being able to see the information that, this is where you're trying to go. You see big arrows, you see direction, you say where you want, what you're wanting, but you have heads up displays of what's in there, what it is. I think this is the lowest hanging fruit in that process. Next question.
Next question comes from Douglas Carmichael. Jim mentioned practicing with cloud technologies outside of ACG Sandbox. What strategy would you recommend outside of setting billing alerts to avoid unexpectedly large charges and wouldn't want any shockers from the bank fraud department?
Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, so I would definitely look into AWS organizations. So first create a root account. That's your billing account. Don't provision any resources in there, no EC2 instances, no S3 buckets. Use that as your master billing account. Use AWS organizations to create those sub-accounts. And then on those sub-accounts, you can actually assign service control policies to limit what's allowed to be created within there. And then on top of that, use AWS billing alerts to alert you if any of the accounts that are within your organization go past a budget amount that you set that you're comfortable with, then you can take action on those sub-accounts.
Well answered. Great work, producers, having lots and lots of questions. We had no problem getting through 2 hours. The producers really stepped up and asked a lot of great questions. So really well done, and great conversation to everyone here. It's great. It was a great panel. We really knocked it out of the park. So well done. Tomorrow we're going to talk about. There's kind of a cool tool. This Moment tools. They're I can't quite figure out what they, how they do what they do. So I brought them in so we can figure it out together. So if you're in audio, these are audio tools for mobile. So these are audio software that lets you do a lot more kind of production scale audio input. And I've gotten lazy in the sense that I've decided that this looks really like it could work really well, but I don't quite understand it. So let's have everybody chew on it and ask questions. So we're gonna dig into that tomorrow and see what so please take a look at it ahead of time and think of questions that you might have around their products, and we'll have some folks from their company here tomorrow, and we'll check it out. All right, tomorrow, by the way, in after hours we will be watching the Apple event. So I will be on MacBreak, but I will not be there for the thing. I won't be at Twit for that. I'll be here with all of you. So if you feel the need to come and discuss it with us, remember that we are not playing it into after hours. We are all watching it on our own and talking amongst ourselves. So that's how we'll do it in after hours. And so we'll just this is the second ear experience, so to speak. And then we'll answer questions and talk about it while we're in real time. I will have to, right after that, jump into MacBreak and talk about it again. But I'll be smarter in MacBreak because all of us will have talked about it together. So anyway, so it should be good. All right, we'll see you in after hours. All right.